fight. We're gonna win. I just want you all to know, remind you that I made a choice with my life to live in a community where we don't confuse wealth with worth. And I've unfortunately seen a lot of trauma in my inner city community that is the way it is because of the government-sanctioned segregation, racism, discrimination. It was baked in American policies literally up until the 1970s by law. We are in a city that all these environmental disasters where my kids don't have clean soil, clean air, clean water, and then they blame kids who have their brains addled by lead, which interrupts your executive function. And then what does it want to do with a kid that starts showing emotional distress? They want to throw them in jail or suspend them as black children get more suspended. And so I lost my first election for mayor, and politics was just, I was devastated by the loss. I had a guy who won office that was attacking my supporters. And so I know we're short on time, but the most traumatic event of that period of my life was a 19-year-old who was shot in the chest, 100 feet from where I was. I ran to help him, and it was gruesome. And I was trying to stop the blood coming from his chest, trying to stop the blood pouring from his mouth. I felt his heart stop. I felt his breathing stop. I'm screaming his name. And by the time the paramedics got there and shoved me out of the way, ripped open his shirt, I knew he was dead. And the police director that came told me, you were shaking. I don't have memories. I don't even know how I got back to my apartment in the projects where I was living, but this is what I do remember. I remember the next memory I have, after talking to the police director, was standing in front of my sink, trying to scrub another boy's blood off of my hands. And then I felt something in me break like I'd never felt before. So much rage and anger at this country. It's not, my parents taught me not to be consumed by it, but I was being consumed by anger because we put our hands on our hearts and we swear that we're going to be a nation of liberty and justice for all. I love my country. I love that ideal, but how can we have a nation where so much violence happens and it doesn't even make the paper anymore? We are the most powerful nation in the world, but we can't stop our children from dying from gun violence, which is the #1 killer of our kids. And that day at that sink, I felt like giving up. I felt like quitting. I felt like nobody cared, and that the problems were so much bigger that I poured my life trying to get a position where maybe I could make a difference, and I failed. The voters didn't choose me. And I remember getting into the sink, into the shower, and just wanting to clean myself, and then I did the strangest thing of turning the water up so hot, almost hoping that the pain on the outside would numb the pain on the inside. The next morning, I barely slept. I get up, I'm living in the top floor of the projects, I go down early in the morning as the sun's coming up, and I'm walking through the lobby of that building, and then I have this weird memory that in that lobby, before I moved into the neighborhood, the tenant president, the leader of the whole community, this elderly black woman that held that community together with the force of her will, her son, while she was the tenant president in the 80s, her son was murdered in the lobby that I was walking through. This wasn't a kid like me that I didn't know. This was her child. And yet she never left those buildings. She never stopped fighting for her community. She was the force. She could have moved out. I knew where she worked, but she stayed. And almost as if God had planned it for me to rescue me from this nihilistic, dark place of rage that was not in any way, was consuming me. I walked into the courtyard between these two buildings, and the only other person in the courtyard was Miss Virginia Jones, the tenant president. And she had her back turned to me, and almost as if I'm screaming in silence under 100 feet of water, she somehow senses me and turns around and she sees me, and she doesn't say a word. She does the only thing I needed at that moment, which was opening her arms. And I ran to this woman, like a little child to a mother, but I'm this 6'3" guy. I'm happy I didn't knock her over. But she wrapped her arms around me and held me, and as soon as she squeezed me, like a dam broke. I cried tears of rage and hurt and fear and trauma. And then she started saying soothingly 2 words, over and over again. And they calmed me. And They became like an anchor that saved me from going adrift. And I would repeat these words over and over when I became mayor of the city and had tough days. I say them to myself in the Senate when I feel like I'm banging my head against implacable walls of resistance. I say them when I'm sprinting from a plane after a vote that I desperately disagree with. I repeat these words that have nothing to do with religion and have everything to do with how we all got here. Every one of us is here because of people that returned to these two words, who knew that hope is not like some outside feeling. It is this conviction that despair will never have the last word. As she rubbed my back, she said over and over again, stay faithful, stay faithful, stay faithful. If you're angry right now, I understand it. If you're afraid right now, I understand it. But I'm telling you, no, I am promising you that our country has been on the brink. It has been at crossroads before, and every single time we've been saved by people with the kind of grit that Miss Jones showed, that Ella Baker showed, that Marian Wright Edelman showed, that Sojourner Truth showed. We are here because of heroes, most of whose names we don't know, who every day chose not despair, that I'm going to be the hope. And so I pray everybody does not soft pedal or downplay your hurt, your disagreements, or your anger, but at the end of the day, return to the only hope we have, which is us. What am I doing? How can I persevere? And this is my promise. We have been through the darkest of times in our country's history, and this is a dark time. But this is my promise to you. If we summon the grit and the guts and the gumption, the resilience and the heart and this, yes, the faith of our ancestors, I promise you, like my parents' generation, who sang so proudly in front of tear gas and dogs and fire hoses, I promise you, like they sang, we shall overcome.